Hello and welcome to today's live stream. So today we'll be continuing our exploration of Java language features. Particularly, we'll be picking up from where we left last time. So in the last stream, we looked at a few things here and there. But essentially, we were able to set up the Spring Boot backend application. And the way we did that is we went to start.spring.io. So here in start.spring.io, we were able to initialize the project by setting the project group ID, the artifact name, and we were also able to indicate the package name, which would come from the group ID and the artifact name. We selected the packaging structure, which is WAR, and in that stream I explained why I prefer using WAR files instead of JAR files. And we're able to set up the whole project, including dependencies. So today, so after setting up the project, we also managed to implement the persistence layer. We were able to create this movie entity, which has 3 attributes. And then we were able to create the matching repository, which is this repository, extending JPA repository. Currently, we don't have any custom functions on it as of yet, because we don't need them for now. So JPA repository gives us CRUD functions that we can begin using before we set up custom queries. So another thing we're doing is TDD, test-driven development. And for each layer of this, we were able to write matching unit / integration test. So when it comes to the movie entity, we have this movie persistence test, where we used test entity manager to create an instance of movie and persist it, save it in the database using test entity manager, and check the matching value that we retrieved. Yes, welcome, Paras. Indeed, so this is Spring focused, and if you build with Spring, I think that's pretty awesome. So if you have any suggestions on how we can improve my strategy, feel free to suggest. And yeah, we'll continue building the rest of this. So so we have this movie entity, and we have the matching movie persistence test. And what this test does, like I was explaining, it just create a test movie instance, and you use persistent flash. What persistent flash will do, is that it will try and save this movie entity in the database. If that save operation succeeds, it will return the matching entity, and we can use that matching entity to do our verification steps, which involves using these assertions. Yes, yeah, so I'm adding test cases for each layer. patterns. So I'm having each test for each layer. So any code that we write has to have a matching unit test or integration test. So that's essentially what TDD is. And what the rules we are following can be found on this article. In fact, I have it on my history here. So there's this article by Robert Martin, the author of Clean Code. So he wrote this article regarding test-driven development. And we are using these 3 cycles of test-driven development. So we are using, first thing, we must write a failing test before we write any production code. So we are beginning with the test instead of beginning with the code. And once we have a test and the test is failing, then we write some production code. Once we write enough production code to make the test pass, then we move on to write another test. So you must not write more of a test than is sufficient to fail. You must not write more production code than is sufficient to make the current failing test pass. So interesting article. You should take time and check it out, especially if you are not practicing TDD or you've just heard about it and are curious about how you can start. I'd recommend checking out this article. It's pretty detailed and pretty good. Yes, I think, I don't know if Google can allow me to attach a web link. Let me try. So that's the link. Yes, that's the link to the article, so you can check it out. Awesome. So yeah, you said you don't practice TDD. I think you should try it. You don't have to practice it all the time, but if you have the space and the nature of the project allows you to do test-driven development, it's highly encouraged. The biggest advantage with it is at the end of the day, you are sure that your code works because by the time you are done building the software, you've written a test for each layer, and at least when it comes to the actual code, you're sure that it will work. And if there's any failures, it has to be environmental failures, like the server in which it is being executed in, maybe some user action that you could not anticipate, and those can be fixed with user acceptance testing, UAT. But if you're doing TDD, at least you're safe from those issues. So highly encouraged. And the other cool thing is within Spring, the support for testing is really well done. So you won't have any problems with writing tests. JUnit is very well maintained. It has really cool features. If you need mocking, Mockito is really cool with that. And also Spring itself, Spring Boot has APIs for testing. So that makes life really easy. So Patas is saying, I build some projects that are large. I'm not sure I can test them. Yeah, I mean, I can see that because testing takes more time out of your allowed or allocated time for the project. So it might be a bit of, you might have to weigh whether you want to spend the time that you would otherwise use to write production code and allocate that time to writing tests. But if you are just initializing the project, it's a new project, I think that's the best time to do some test-driven development. When the project gets complicated, where you are adding a lot of, you're doing a lot of patching and there's additional branching and the logic becomes a bit complex, then you might rely more on quality assurance. If you're working in a company that has a quality assurance process, you might rely more on the quality assurance guys and hope that they're doing user acceptance testing before a release goes out. Yeah, but I agree. There's a bit of a weighing that you have to do. You have to decide whether the tests that you are writing are worth the extra time that will cost you, and also keeping you from writing production code. Yeah. But if you're not strained on time, the tooling and the support for testing within Spring is really, really well done. So it's a much easier thing to do in Spring. Oh yeah, if you just graduated, I would encourage you to make it a habit to, by default, build your backend applications with TDD in mind, so that it becomes something that you know how to do. So when you're not doing it, it's not because you don't know how to do it, it's because you've chosen not to do it. And those are two separate things. You might not be doing something because you don't know where to start. But if you know how to do TDD and you choose not to do TDD, you are more safe than somebody who doesn't know how to do TDD with their backend applications, as opposed to just deciding for this project I won't be doing test-driven development. Yeah, please do. It's a nice tool to have in your toolbox, and then you get to choose when to use it and when not to use it. Good. So check out that article. When it comes to testing tools, I guess you're familiar with Mockito. So check out Mockito too if that's new to you. JUnit, of course, JUnit is super important to have in your toolbox. And then within Spring, there's a bunch of APIs that Spring Boot and Spring Framework provides for testing. So look for those testing libs. For example, mock MVC for testing controllers, and some annotations that we're using here, like this data JPA test for setting up the application context in a way that it doesn't load up and everything just loads up the bits, the persistence layer, so that we can just test that and we don't have to bring in the whole application context. There's also some other annotations that you might use to create custom beans for your test. So yeah, get familiar with those. I think it will be super, super helpful. Yep. So, last time when I set it up on the stream that I did previously, I started by first writing this movie persistence test. And the movie persistence test has one function. Of course, I'm using data JPA test, and data JPA test isolates the application context for this test to just the persistence layer. So it won't try to load controllers, it won't try to load our service methods, it won't try to load anything else. It'll just load the entities and repositories. So makes the test execute way faster than if you're loading everything. Then I was using extend with. So extend with is the communication link between JUnit and Spring. So this extend with annotation allows us to pass this Spring extension that tells JUnit to work with Spring in running this test. Mainly because we need the Spring application context for the test to work. And of course, AutoWired for injecting the test entity manager. And in the test, like I was saying, we just persisting this movie, and we call flash to get it back, and then we're able to test it. The way we know that it's not the movie that we passed in and it's actually an entity is by this ID changing up. So before we persist, the ID is null, and if you can see, the movie has a generated value, which means the ID will be generated. And now when we actually do the persistence, the ID here will not be null, it will actually have a value. And that's what this annotation, this assertion tests for. And we can even log it. I can use Lombok to get a logger. And we can actually log that. I use final as reference rather than field injection. Yes, that's also an option. My personal preference is I'll use AutoWired as long as I have like less than 3 fields. If I have more than 3 fields, I use final so that I don't have too many annotations. Because with AutoWired, for every field, I'll have to annotate it with AutoWired. Final makes the code look less Spring and more Java because you're not adding annotations. It's just constructor injection. It feels more natural. So I agree with you. It's much more aesthetically pleasing to use the final keyword instead of auto-add. But I only limit that to classes that have more than 3 fields being injected. In a case where I have like 1 field, in this case, I'll just use auto-add because it's less noisy. It doesn't clutter the code too much. But if I have more than 3, I'll go for field injection with the final. With the constructor injection using the final keyword. So what I was saying, I use request constructor less, less headache. Best way to do, it's the best way. Auto-add is when you want to do something quick and dirty, and for instance, here we are writing a test, so we don't really worry too much about it. But constructor injection is way better. Yeah, so when I use the Lombok log annotation, it will actually go through the class path and look for SL4J or whichever logging library that's available. That's the cool thing with it. I don't have to worry about which logging lib will actually do the actual logging. So Lombok handles that. In a Spring Boot application, of course, it's highly likely that it will be working with SL4J in the background. But it's convenient because you don't have to set up the logging on your own. As long as you have the logging library in your class path, you're good to go. So let's log that ID. So movie ID entity dot get ID. So if I execute this test, we'll see that I was already working on some code that I didn't finish up. Let me just comment this. So when I ended the previous stream, I was working on the service layer, and I left it at halfway because I ran out of time. But we'll conclude that in this stream. So the test passes, and we can see that where's the movie? Okay. So there's the test. Our log should have movie ID. Yeah, so here it is. So movie ID is now 1. And it was null before we persisted it. See here, it was null. So when we do the persist and flash, we get an entity that actually has an ID. So that's how we know persistence is actually happening. Yes, I set up your environment. You can join in on the challenge. I'll try and get this code to be available on GitHub, so that at the start of the stream you can clone it and we can do like a code along. But that's something I need to take care of later. But for now, we just have movie, and movie has ID, name, and release date. And then we have a movie persistence, which is this test, should persist movie. And what it does, it just uses test entity manager to do the persistence. So after that, of course, you move to the repository layer. And here we have a movie repository test. So this is specifically for testing whether we've integrated correctly with JPA repository. Here I'm also using data JPA test to limit the application context to persistence. And I extend with to bring in a Spring extension. And I have 2 methods here. I should save movie. And what this does is we try and persist the movie. This time we are not using test entity manager. We're actually using movie repository, which is this interface that extends JPA repository. And once we persist it, the save function should return the value that's persisted, somewhat like what test entity manager does with persistent flash. And then we use the assertions to check the values. So first of all, we check that the value is not null, and then we're able to verify each field. For instance, the name of the movie, a release date, and ID. The other test here should retrieve, so this tests retrieval of the movie. And here we sort of do the same thing. We have a movie, we save it. This should give us back the movie. We check the ID. So here I was just logging the ID to demonstrate the same idea. And then we assert that that's not null, but then we move a step further by calling find by ID from JPA repository, which should give us the entity based on the ID. And remember, if you can see, the initial ID we used was null. So after persistence, the entity has an actual ID, and we can use that ID to retrieve the entity. This returns optional. So what we end up with here is optional movie. So this is optional. I don't know why that import didn't work. Optional. Yeah, so this is optional, which means we have to check whether it contains a value. One major pitfall with optional is that it can wrap a null. So you can have an optional that has null inside. So even if its present check succeeds, what might be present is a null value. So that's why we are doing another null check here. So once we have it, of course, we call get on the optional, and we're able to obtain the value, and we check it for null. We check the movie name to match this, and we check the release date by using temporal comparison. So local datetime allows you to get the temporal value, and you can have if you have the temporal value for one local date instance and temporal value for another local date instance, you can actually compare them to see whether they're the same. So that's what we are utilizing here. So this is equal function utilizes that. So it will do this comparison, and let's just look at the docs for it. Check if this date is equal to the specified date. This checks to see if this date represents the same point in the local timeline as the other date. Yeah. So that's what that does. Yeah. Okay. Looks like it's just a manual process here because it's checking. Okay, so it's comparing the year, then compares the month, and then compares the day, and returns the comparison. I assume the way normal comparators work, this will return 1 if the other one of them is greater than the other, 0 if they are the same, and -1 if the second one is greater. Yeah, because this seems to be, in fact, it's overriding compare to, which is probably a comparator thing. Let's see. Local date. So let's see what's here. Yeah, so implements temporal adjustment, and IntelliJ, of course, is doing too much again. That compare to implementation seems more familiar to comparators. So it's interesting that's that. Anyway, back to the test. So this will compare the date, and if we run these two tests, since we've integrated the JPA repository, we'll see that the two tests pass. So those two tests pass. So we've seen at the entity level our tests are passing. At the repository level, the test is passing. So now we need to take care of the service level. And that's what we were doing last time. So this is where I stopped. So should pick up from here. So what we're creating is a movie service, which is a class that I've already created here. So it's just a plain class. And I use this at service annotation so that the class can be discovered by Spring during component scanning. And also it can qualify as a bean. And this is the test. The different thing between this service test and the other tests is that this I decided to make this a plain JUnit test. Not really plain JUnit test because I'm also using Mockito, but it doesn't depend on Spring. So this is just, I intend for it to just be a plain test. So we won't be loading Spring Beans or Spring application context for this. We'll just try to do a direct test on the service. So what do I mean by entity level? Welcome, Dickens. So what do I mean by entity level and the repository level? So actually those are kind of in the same layer. They are both in the persistence layer. But what I mean is the entities, this movie, so this is the entity that we are using. I've seen that term entity being used when it comes to controller endpoints. It breaks my brain a little bit because I don't understand how that would relate to controllers, because controllers implement the HTTP protocol, which means those objects should be called resources, not entities, but some people call them entities. So I understand maybe that's where the confusion might be. But this, when I talk about the entity level, this is what I mean. And then the repository level is our movie repository. So utilizing the repository pattern. I hope that's clear, Dickens. If there's something specific that I probably didn't get that you're referring to, you can let me know. Hey, Ian, welcome to the stream. Welcome to the session. So we are doing a simple Spring Boot Hello World, which is which should be fun. And we are trying to have an end-to-end API for movies. So you can use this API to have like a listing of movies like IMDb, and somebody can request a movie based on some basic properties, but it's meant to just serve as a hello world. Otherwise, welcome to the stream, Ian. I'm learning Java. So NGT Tantai. So NGT Tantai is saying I'm learning Java Spring Boot too. Yeah, that's awesome to hear, Tantai. It's a really wonderful backend framework, and it's very convenient to use. I think only second to Laravel, my opinion. I think Laravel also is very convenient for backend, but Spring Boot is, at least for me, is number one there, because of the incredible amount of tooling and incredible amount of libraries that you can use. So it's fun. So Ian is used to having us on Google Meet. So this is a stream, and unfortunately, there is no bi-directional communication. Okay, so let's see. So we are now at the service layer, and at this service layer, what I want to handle first is just saving a movie. And the service layer is supposed to act as an intermediary between the persistence layer, which is the repositories and the entities, database level, if you're using a database or file, or whatever thing you're using for persistence. So it should act as the intermediary between that persistence layer and your front end, which can be your API endpoints or your web front end, maybe something with Angular or React or Themeleaf. If you're a hardcore Java developer, that would be Themeleaf. So what we'll be writing here is the piece of this that should act as a glue between your persistence and your controllers. And the way we are going to do it is we'll provide some of the CRUD functions, and we'll have to also do some wiring between converting resources to entities and converting entities to resources, and also declaring some custom resources. So let me see where I left it. So I just started writing this, and yeah, and I left it here. So of course we're using inject mocks. This inject mocks is from Mockito, and that's why I'm using Mockito extension. And what it will do is it will inject this movie service, but also it will inject the field, any field in movie service. So if you have any field here, that will be added as a mock. So that's why I use that annotation. And here we just have an example of a movie, and we have this create movie resource. So create movie resource is what the client is sending us. So if you have like a mobile client or a web client with React or Angular, this create movie resource is what the client is sending. So let's make that create movie resource. Again, following TDD, here we have a test that's broken, so we have license to write some production code to make it pass. So I'll use a record for this. There's something I learned recently that allows us to make this a little bit more convenient, but I'll skip that for now. So we'll just make it a record, and for the sake of simplicity, I'll skip that. So here we are supposed to define what should happen, what the client should send us. So this is client resource that should form the post request for a movie. So if a client wants to create a movie on our server, they'll need to send us this create movie resource. And the create movie resource should have some basic properties. It should have the movie name and the release date. And this is the release date. So that will be our create movie resource. So now when I go back to the service test, so that's our resource. So once the movie has been created, we need a way to respond to the client, and we can respond with a resource, created movie resource, and this can contain additional details about the movie that has been created on our server. We can decide to do some heters, send them the links to that resource, but I'll keep it simple on this one. We'll just have the payload, created movie resource. I'll also make this a record, and so it will have the usual properties. So it will have the movie name. Perhaps it might not help to send back the, okay, let's just send it back. So the name of the movie, release date, one of the same details we got from the client, and release date. And we can include something extra, which is something the client didn't have, and that is the ID. So you can include an ID referring to the ID of the movie, which is generated by the server. So that's why it becomes useful. And now if you go to our movie test, we'll see that create movie resource, the client doesn't need to send us an ID because we're not even going to use it. Our persistence layer generates the IDs. So create, so that's created. Yeah, so this will have ID, the other one will not. So this is what the client sends us, this is what we send back, and they should have the ID. And how we obtain the ID is we need to call the repository layer and call save on the repository layer. And once we call save, we'll get an entity, and that entity will contain this ID that we actually need. So we need to simulate that. The way we can do that is, so of course, one problem is that we don't want this service to be dependent on the repository layer. So any function that requires us to call repository layer code needs to be simulated. And that's why Mockito is here. So you can use Mockito to fake an actual call to our repository or an actual entity. And the way we can do that is we can use this function from Mockito, mockito.when, and when you can use it to simulate the repository operation, repository.save, and here we can use any signify that if any type that matches the type that we're going to specify here is used as an argument for this, you should do this, we should do something. And the way when works is you give it the operation that you want to perform or to simulate. A more interesting word to use here would be to fake the operation you want to fake, and the value you want to be the outcome of that operation. So you can use then returning, and in then return you can have the value that should be available to you after that function is called. So what will happen is, as the test is being executed, when JUnit encounters this function in the actual production code, it will fake the results, and the return type, if that function has a return type, the return type will be that matching entity. So that's what that will help us with. Of course, I need to import any, but that's not the any that I'm looking for. So we need any from I think Hamcrest. Yeah, from Hamcrest. And so we need this repository. We know that repository will be a field in a movie service, so we can have a mock of the repository, private movie repository. And that will be our repository. So that calls repository.save any movie.class, then return. So now the entity, so the fake entity here is an instance of movie entity, and we can give it fake fields. So the main thing that we'll be simulating is the ID. So let's give it an ID of 122L, and the name will match the resource. So movie resource.name, and the release date also will match the resource release date. So that is what's going to be returned. And when we get to created movie resource, so when we created the resource, we use the fake entity.id, get ID, to form it. Seeing some problems here. In fact, for type S is not within bounds, should extend. So I think there's a problem with the any that I'm using here. Let's see if I try and use an actual movie. Okay, but I was expecting this to work. Because we're just passing movie.class. This should have been okay. I don't know what I'm missing. But either way, we can still use the fake entity for this. So it will try to persist this, and then it will return that fake entity as a result of that operation. One way to also simulate it in a more real sense, you can have the movie entity. So this is the entity without the ID. So this has none. And we can have the actual fake movie, which is our fake entity. Then we persist the movie entity, and we get back this, and this will have the actual ID, like so. So we can already see that our test is shaping up. So what we've gotten is we have the movie resource that we expect, and we have the movie entity that we expect to persist based on the fields of that movie resource, essentially what we get from the client. And now we've simulated the persistence of that movie and the value that should be returned, and then we use the value that's returned to form the created movie resource value that should be the outcome of the call to the service. So when we get a request from the client, once it hits the controller, we'll call the movie service and we'll call the save function. So that's what we'll do here. Service dot, do we have an instance? Yeah, service. Service dot save, save, and it will save the, it will use the movie resource. Let me label it correct. So this is the create resource that we get from the client. So this is create resource. Just fix this. So that's the create resource. So when we call save, we use the create resource. And once the save function is executed, we expect to get this created resource. So this can be our expected created resource, and this can be the actual created resource. And so once that save function goes through, we should have that resource. And now we can do some assertions. We can assert that expected actual created resource, first of all, is not null. I'll need to import these from assert.j, that one. So the assertions are from org.assert.j assertions. That's what we are using. There are many assertion libraries. JUnit comes with its own default assertion, so you can have multiple options here. Of course, I'm getting that read because we haven't implemented the save function yet. But let's just write the rest of the assertions and see how far we can go. So this will be a created movie resource. Actual created resource dot name is equal to, so it should be equal to what the client sent us, which is Dark Knight. Just use name there. Then we can assert that the actual created resource dot release date is equal to the release date. Yeah. And you can check this for true. Yeah. So Tanta is saying I never write tests. Okay, you can get away with not writing tests. That's the main thing that you need to remember, is you can get away with it. You still end up writing software that's functional, but tests are the way for you to get assurance. You are sure that when you write a piece of your software, and especially when you're modifying existing code, you're sure that you didn't break anything. So tests can serve that purpose. They give you some confidence in what you've built, and at the end of the day, you are more sure that you didn't break anything. But if you just add additional code to your existing piece of software and then you just ship it and cross your fingers that it will work, that's a bit more dangerous. Yeah, but some people prefer to live dangerously, so there's no problem there. Personally, I prefer to write tests. The only time I don't write tests is when the tooling support for testing is not good, especially in Android. Android is a classic case. There's a very quote unquote useless library they are called Espresso. And with Espresso, it's supposed to work seamlessly with JUnit, Espresso Android. It's supposed to work seamlessly with JUnit, but for whatever reason, the guys who maintained it, I don't know if it is. There's this rumor that Google engineers are usually very lazy. They leave the office by 3 p.m. But it has fallen so behind in support for JUnit that it's gotten to a point where it's not useful at all. A lot of it is broken. You need to use some third-party libraries for you to write basic tests. So when I'm doing Android, I only write unit tests and I don't do integration tests. I leave that to actual manual testing with the UAT, user acceptance testing. So it's kind of sad because when the tooling is failing you, you can't be blamed for not writing tests. But if the tooling is awesome, like it is in Spring Boot, you have no excuse. So I would encourage you to start writing tests if you're not already writing tests. Okay, cool. Let's continue with this function. So we've done the assertions. So now what we need is the actual save function. So here we've checked that the actual, we've checked the name, we've checked the release date. So there's one thing that we are not checking, which is actual resource.id should be the same as the expected resource.id. It's a really long name. Maybe I can shorten it a bit. Expected created resource. Expected resource. Perhaps it's better. Expected resource.name, and I can change this to var, shorten it a little bit. And now, if we attempt to run the test, we see that expected semicolon. It's wrong since I got into that. So if we run it now, we'll see that the test fails, of course, due to compilation issues. So now we have license to go ahead and write some actual production code. So we'll go to movie service. And in our movie service, first of all, we need the repository. So I'll use, let's use constructor injection this time. So movie repository, that's our repository. And we have public movie repository, movie service receives a movie repository. Some people prefer to use Lombok here. There's an annotation in Lombok that allows you to do this. I think it's args flags constructor, something like that. Inject args. There's an annotation that some people use to get rid of this step. But for this case, because I don't use that annotation, I've even forgotten the name of it. I'll just do it the way I usually do it, which is that. So that should give us a clear initialization for that. And now we can have our save function. So this save function will return a created movie resource, and it will be saving this create movie resource. So this is the resource from the client. So I can even call it client resource. Yeah, by the way, required args constructor. So yeah, that's the annotation. Thanks, Dickens. Required args constructor. So you can use this, and if you use that, you don't have to do this. So this will still work for you. But like I said, I don't prefer it as a design choice. There's nothing technical about my preference. Yes, yeah, you're correct. You're correct about that, Dickens. So it's a required args constructor. So required args constructor removes the need of writing the constructor initialization code on your own. So you don't have to do this. Once you mark a field as final, then that annotation will handle setting up the constructor. So we have the function. For a start, let's return null, just to satisfy the test slightly. We've gotten rid of the compilation errors on our test. Let's run the test again and see where we will fail. And now if we run the test again, we see that we are failing at a different spot. Expected actual not to be null, which is this assertion. Created resource, so the value that we are getting from the save function. So now we can implement the save function. So for this to work, first we need to call repository. So we need to call repository.save, and that should give us the entity repository dot save, and we pass in the client resource, which actually won't work. We need to pass in a movie. So we need to compose a movie from the client resource. So we can do that here, or we could get a bit smart with it and create a static function here that creates the resource, creates the movie. So so converting from the create movie resource to an actual movie. So you can say to movie, and to movie, if we can, okay, it would not make sense to use an instance function here. So this just will be the resource, and we can return new movie, and the new movie, we can have null for the ID because the client doesn't have the ID, and then resource, we can get the name from the resource, and we can get the release date again from the resource. And now here what we can do is call client resource dot client resource, create resource dot to movie, and we pass in that client resource. So this should give us the movie. Make it more readable, perhaps you can have a local variable here, movie, and that will be the movie, and we pass in the movie to the save function. So this should give us the entity, and now we can create created. So this entity is optional, which means we can have some logic here. So this is an optional value, entity, and that means we can have some logic here. For instance, checking if it's present. Is that optional? Oh no, it actually returns the actual value. If the save fails, what happens? A legal argument exception in case the given entity is null. Okay, so if the save function fails, it will throw an illegal argument exception instead of returning an optional. So that's interesting. I was expecting it to return an optional here because that operation might fail, might not be able to save the value in the database. But anyway, so since we're getting an actual value, you don't have to do the optional check. So instead, we can just return a new created movie resource, and we can have the ID this time, and we can have the client resource. Could get fancy and provide a constructor for this. So records support having secondary constructors, so we can do public created movie resource, and this created movie resource will have the ID, and it will have a create movie resource from the client. So this is the client resource, and okay, so then here we can call this and pass in the ID. I can pass in the name from the client resource, and we can pass in the release date. What's the problem? Oh yeah, I'm using the wrong. So this is created movie resource, not create movie resource. So having that constructor allows us to just pass this in directly and then pass in the ID. So we pass in the ID and resource that will be sandwiched together in the created movie resource constructor, and it will form a created movie resource that has the ID, which we pass in here, and the name and release date, which come from the client. And now, yeah, back to the service. So our service seems ready, and there is one way we can tell whether it's ready is if our test passes. So we can go to the test and run the test, and the test fails. Why? Potential stubing problem, the invocation of save method, repository.save, okay, has the following different arguments: save the movie, and the one we're using is different. It looks like our fake save function has some problems. Let's see what that could be. So yeah, I mean, movie entity, so that movie entity, and then return fake entity. But the failure seems to be coming from here, where we pass in the create resource. But that error is likely affecting this function. Let me see that error message again. Yeah, do return when API for stubing. Okay. Oh yeah, classic problem of hash code. So the movie object I'm passing with this save, because I'm passing an actual object instead of using any, it's checking the hash code and finding that those two objects are not the same. Although it's the same object, it's the same type of object, but the objects are not the same. So somebody saying the ID is hanging. Does anybody else have any problem with the ID? It could be my stream, probably. Probably there's like a delay thing. But let me know if it persists. If you still have problems seeing the ID, just let me know. So essentially, what we have the same object, the same type of object, but not the same object, because they have different values somehow. But the fields we are using are the same. Let me just make sure of that. So when we call save, so we then get the client resource, it has entity ID, and when we call movie.save to movie, makes this null, and the name and the release date. Oh, okay. Thanks for that confirmation, Dickens. So I think it's just the delay from my stream. Could be some fluctuation with my internet or something like that. And also, the amount of space I'm using for this is so much, so big. Let me try and reduce it. Yeah, that was taking up too much space. Okay. So now, let's see how we can resolve this. One way to quickly resolve it is to successfully use any here, and yeah, any from Mockito argument matches, any movie.class. I think I was using the wrong import last time. Save. Oh yeah. So when we call save, we pass in the client resource, not the movie. So this will be create movie resource dot class. I think it's just my network. There's a bit of a delay, but I think it should resolve. It should resolve after a while. Let me try disabling video, perhaps. But it doesn't seem to drop a lot of frames, so it still should be okay. Um, mm. Oh wait, it's actually stuck. Yeah, so even on this side, I'm seeing the ID is actually stuck. Okay, I don't know what causes this. Oh. Let me see if I, okay, how do we resolve this? Yeah, it's literally stuck. It's not showing anything. Let me restart the stream and see if that will resolve it. So strange. So I'm back. Let me know if the screen is still stuck. Yeah, so it seems to be unstuck now. Yeah, I think it's working correctly. So I was awesome, awesome, awesome. Yeah, so I don't know how much you guys missed, but I had a bit of a problem with this save function, and I was able to resolve it by using the correct import for any. Essentially, the problem that I had, the one I was talking about, is so yeah. So the way this function was set up is we just try and simulate the save function here. And when I executed the test with that setup, it would fail, and it would fail with Mockito telling me that I'm using the wrong stuff. But essentially, if you ignore all that long error message, the failure seems to be that I'm using the same type movie here, but they have different IDs. So this has that different hash code, and this one has a different hash code. And the way I was able to resolve it is by using any here, and that's any from Mockito argument matchers. This one, argument matchers Mockito, and then I would pass in. I think this is create movie resource dot class. No, sorry, that would be the movie actually, not create resource. So that would be the movie movie.class. So any object that's of type movie should be able to work right now. It doesn't have to be the same object with the same hash code of the same signature. So now this movie entity seems a little bit unnecessary, because whichever movie entity will be passed into repository.save in our service here. So while executing service, whichever movie will be passed in here, Mockito will be able to pick it up due to this line. And it will return fake entity regardless. So this becomes unneeded. And now if we run the test with that setup, we see that the test is able to pass. So we're able to do that save operation. Okay. So now let's move this forward to, so we've done the save operation. So we could move on to the controllers and do the controller endpoint that's responsible for this. But I'm also thinking, let's see. So let's do the controller. Let's do the controller. We'll come back to add additional service methods if we want to do anything extra. But perhaps let's do the retrieval first. So let's do a situation where the client is trying to request for a value from us and try and see what happens. So to do that, our service function needs to support find movie. So let's assume the client wants a list of all the movies. Maybe something more interesting. They want a set of movies between a certain year or within a certain year or a certain date range. So let's do a test here. And the test will be public void should find movies by year test. So all the movies in 2026, all the movies in 2021, and so on. And this is a test. So we'll use the test annotation. And let's try to see what should happen in that test. So for it to happen, first we need a fetch movie resource. So we need a way for the client to tell us what they want. This can be a fetch movie resource. We could also achieve this with path variables, but I wanted us to write a test that's more service specific. But path variables would also help us achieve the same effect. So let's just use the resource, and this fetch movie resource will have start date, because we're using a date range, maybe local date dot of maybe, I'll just see. So it can be local date. The year is maybe 2012, and the month here can be the month doesn't matter. Essentially, we are relying on the date and end date. So let's say this is from January, and same year 2012, and that will be our end date. So our fetch movie resource will have that start date and end date. Perhaps they might also, okay, I think we can work with this. So when the client makes this request to obtain the movies, they'll send us this fetch movie resource, and we need to respond with movies list resource, or we can say movies resource. And this will be a new movies resource. And what this will have is essentially a list of movies. Should we wrap that in a resource? We could just return a list of movies instead of wrapping it in a resource. So we'll respond with matching movies, which is a list. I can use list.of, and we can have new movie resource. and we can have a few of them, maybe 3 movies that match that. So when we get a request, the request from the client will contain the fetch movie resource. Our response will have a list of movies. So it will just be a list of movies, nothing complicated. And for this to work, in the service layer, we'll have our actual movies, actual matching movies. And you can call service dot find movies by year, or this can be by date range, so that it's more abstract. And we pass it a fetch movies resource, and so it will give us the actual movies, which is a list. So this will be a list of movie resource. So that's what we'll be doing. So let me shorten this a bit. So this will be actual movies. And we can do assertions, but first of all, let's deal with the compilation issues. So let's have this fetch movies resource. It will be a record. And when fetching the movies, we just need the start date, local date, start date, and we have the end date. So to complete the date range, nothing else that's needed. Then we have the movie resource. So the movie resource is just a minimal version of the movie. It just has this. We just have the name of the movie, and maybe we can pass down the ID if they want to do a subsequent request to the ID. So string name for name of movies, and we can have local date for this date. So that's our movie resource. Let me make sure we are not stuck again. Okay, I think we are good. So that's our fetch movies resource. And now if we go back to the test, we see that that matches that. And so when we obtain the movies, we need these movies to have some unique characteristics, like the ID, the name, and the release date. So local date dot off. Let's just have this first movie in 2012, maybe that month, date 11, and the name of the movie is Tenet. And we can have another movie. I'll copy this so that it's a bit easier to create these additional ones. So the other movie is Alice in Wonderland, and release date is still 2012, but this is August. We can have another one here. These IDs need to be different. Maybe 2, then 3 there. And this other movie is Dark Knight, and same year, different month. This one is maybe December. let's say October, first day of that month. So these are the matching movies, and this is so we can call this expected movies, and this is actual movies. So with that, the only compilation error we have is this, but that gives us license to go ahead and start doing so that gives us license to go ahead and start doing assertion. So you can assert that actual movies is not empty for a start, not empty, and we can assert the size of the movie, the number of movies. So size is equal to 3. So we expect 3 movies, and maybe we can check the first movie, get first, and we can check the name, and we can ensure that it's the same name as the first one in our expected list, and we can check the last one, get last, and we can check the name should be Dark Knight. Dark Knight. Okay, so the only thing left is this function, which we can go ahead and implement. So let's go to the service and implement that function. So the function is public. Of course, we're returning a list of movies this time, and movie resource, not the entity. So we are still using a DTO. So we don't return the actual entity to the client. So find movie by date range. And here we expect the find movie resource. Did we create the resource? Fetch movie resource, yeah, not find movie resource. Fetch movie resource, and can call this fetch resource. And for now, we can return null. It's like I modified the name a little bit. Find movies by date range, yes. Okay, so now we have the compilation issues fixed, and we have, so instead of using fixed values here, let me use the expected, at least utilize it a bit. We can also use it for these other additional assertions. We can say expected movies dot get first dot name, and instead of passing the fixed value here, we can also call expected movies dot get last dot name to get the name, and that should cover it. So let's run the test and see. Of course, the test fails because of the null value. So now we need to go to the service and actually implement the functionality. So we can call repository dot find. Since what we want is the ability to go to the repository and obtain by a date range. I don't know. I think Spring probably has an inbuilt function for that, but it would be fun to also implement our own. So you can have a find by date range, and this will pick the start date from the resource and the end date. In fact, since it's a custom function, we can just pass in the fetch resource. Although I don't want the persistence layer to know too much about the controller layer, so I'll pass in the actual date instead of passing the resource. And this should give us the list of our movies. And let me drop this a little bit so that it's a bit more readable. Now we will be returning, in fact, we'll be returning these movies, but as a movie resource instead of actual movies. So this will give us a movie entity, but we can do something with that movie entity. So I'll convert it to a stream and call map. So movie M will be new movie resource. In fact, there's probably a more interesting way to write this. So we can still call map, and then we call movie resource and call new on it. And of course, we collect this to a list. And for this to work, we'll need to have a secondary constructor here that accepts a movie resource. And it needs to accept movie, the entity, and use that to initialize this movie resource. So entity.id, get ID, entity get name, entity get release date. So now this should work. So you can do direct mapping like this, which is pretty interesting. So now we need to implement this find by date range function. So the way you can do that is we can go to our movie repository, and you can just go ahead and implement the function. So public, so this should give us a list of movies, and java.util, of course, and that is the function. And it receives the start date as local date, start date, and local date is the end date. So that seems to be public by default. And the way we can implement these is, of course, we need to do the test first. So we need to implement a test that will do this. So let's go to our repository layer, movie repository test, and let's get the test function running, available for this. Void should find movies by date test. So our should find movies by date test. What we are testing is we'll have a list of movies. So movies is equals to list.of new movie. We'll have perhaps we can have like 3 of them. I'll utilize the same list of movies I'm using for the service layer test. So going back to the movie service test, let's use these movies. So those movies, and what we can do here is, so now that we have the list of movies, the plan is to pass that list of movies, the list of movies into the database and be able to retrieve that list of movies based on the date range. So the way you can do that is var actual movies is equals to repository dot find by date range, and we can pass in the date range that we want to use for the query. So start date here will be local date dot off. So anything from 2012. So 2012 starting January past. Our end date. So the end date for this will be local date dot off. Of course, the same year 2012. And this time it's December. And yeah, then we can use the start date and end date here. So that this should be the actual movies, and we can assert that the actual movies is not empty. We can assert that the actual movies dot size is equal to movies dot size. Movies dot size. Yeah, so that should do it. We can check for additional properties actually. So we can do get first. If we assume that they'll be returned in the same order, which might not be the case, but let's assume that the order will be maintained, which means we can check the actual, get the name, and match that to the name of the second one, the expected. But this should be enough to at least have a version of the test that we can start implementing. So as expected, the test fails. And it fails because required class on condition such strategy. Essentially, it doesn't know what to do with that find by date range function, because we've not done any implementation, and Spring is not able to derive a query from the way the name is structured. So that's why that's failing. So we can do this. We can make this work by using the query annotation, and we can even use a native query here, which allows us to write something closely similar to actual SQL. So you can do select all from so select all from movies or movie, maybe movies, where so where release, I think it's release date. Yeah, release date. Release date is less than or equal to a value, like the first value, and the same release date is greater than or equal to value 2. I seem to be missing something here. Form name is equals to value expected. Okay. So this should refer to the first argument for the start date, and this should refer to the second argument, the end date. So let me see if this query makes sense. Let's use text blocks for this. make it look nicer and more readable. So now I can do that. The trailing, yeah, can format it nicely like that. So we are selecting from movies where release date. So if the release date is less than, so release date is greater than or equal to start date, or release date is less than or equal to end date. So that's a date between. So there's also a between query that we can use here. So you can say where release date between that and that. So you can check for a value that's between, release date between. Let me try and format it a bit more. So where release date is between the first argument and the second argument. I think this should work. Let me run the test, which is the best way of knowing. So that still doesn't satisfy our test. Okay, so it's JPA repository, the bin. Let's see if we get anything specific here. Okay, no, so no property of type date range found for type movie. So date range. Oh, because it's trying to, okay, it's still trying to convert this into Spring Data JPA native query function. So I don't know how to stop that. Let me try changing the name completely. Fetch date range. And let's see. So what we want is for Spring to allow us to use plain SQL to fetch the data that we are trying to fetch without it intercepting that and trying to convert it into fetch by the found for type movie. Okay. Let's see. Let me see if the entity would, okay. Let me try and use a different name here. So that still doesn't, cannot create query method for fetch by date range. No property fetch by date range found for type movie. And what if you make native query false? Fetch by date range found by type found for type movie. So there's definitely something that I'm not getting right here because I'm failing to give Spring the signal that I'm trying to use SQL, use my own SQL query for this, and it's not supposed to intercept that query and just allow me to do the select statement directly on the database. Let me check the docs and see what I'm missing. Spring data, JPA native queries. So we can have that, and okay, named query. I think this is what I should be. Okay, no, that's different. Because this would have still achieved the same effect. So we can still use this. Yeah, this would have still worked. I think why it didn't give me that effect, because what we had is query. Don't have to specify a name here. And just need to fix the formatting a bit. Select M from movie, where M dot release date is between that and that. From movie M. Okay. So select from movie where release date is between that and that. I think this should, yeah, that should have worked. Okay, so that has worked. So this query will suffice. And let's see how far our test is. So in the logs, you can see that it's actually executing that query. So select that name, release date from movie, where movie release date is between that date and that date. So the query works. Let's see why the test is failing. So actual movies is not empty. Oh, so it's running empty. So I think this could be a matter of logic in my query. Also, we didn't persist this movie, so we are querying an empty database. So I'll call save first to save the movies. That will be querying, and save all. What's the problem? Oh yeah, this is movie resource. So you want to save actual movies. So since we're in the persistence layer, you can just use movie instead of movie resource here. Movie, there we go. So this will persist them, and then we can use them for the query. Okay, that changes the signature here. So we have to do get name. It's no longer a record, it's a class. And now another failure. So what row was already updated or deleted by another transaction for entity? So looks like 322. Oh yeah, so we can't persist with the because the IDs will be generated. So these need to be null. I think that should be, let's see. Yeah, so that handles that. So we're able to persist and retrieve the values. Just to be sure that we are obtaining values within a very specific date range, let's expand this movies list and have some old movie like Contact. That's from 2002. Don't need to change the month. So our list should not, the final value that we get from the database should not contain Contact because it's out of range. So let's see how that goes. My check here, so this should fail, this assertion should fail until we change it. So this, we expect the test to fail. The way we know that our filter function works correctly is if this test fails, at least at that assertion level, because now the sizes won't match, or at least they shouldn't match. Okay, so we see that they fail, and because expected 4, found 3, yeah, because only 3 qualify. So that fail is here. So not all of these movies qualify. So the actual movies will be 3, but the size of the values we persisted is 4. So we can change this to 3. And if we run it now, it should pass. Yes. So now we have a function that is able to retrieve the movies based on their release date, and it can actually do that within a date range. So now we can go back to the service, and our service function was doing the work of obtaining the movies by a date range also. And let's see how far we are with that test. So if you run it, of course, it fails, and it fails because, yeah, so the actual value is empty because we have not simulated the repository layer operation. Since we are not doing an actual repository layer query, this value will be different. So we need to simulate this, or at least create a fake version of this for the test. And the way we'll do that is you can use Mockito. When repository dot find fetch by date range, and I'll prefer not to worry about the date range here, although we can use actual values for a change. So I can use that start date, end date, then return. So this should return expected movies. So this has to be actual entities. So it will be similar to this list, but with a caveat where instead of resource, it will be entities. So movies, and this is expected movie. And that's a movie, another movie, another movie. So expected movies, I need a different name. Expected entities. So that's expected entities, and yeah, so that should handle that. So anytime fetch by date range is called with that range, it will return this list, and then this list can be used for our resources, and it can help satisfy the test. So let's see how that goes. Yeah, so that that succeeds. So now we have a service that's able to fetch the movies based on the date they were released. using the date range. So if we go to our production code, so we have this movie service. And what this movie service can do is it can save a movie based on client resource. It can find a movie based on date range that's coming from the client request and return that to the controller. So I'll be stopping this here for now, and then we'll do a third version of this, a third episode, if you may, and in that stream we will look at the controller, the actual controller functions, and also we'll be following the same TDD workflow, which means we will write some tests, and then we'll write some controller functions, and we'll see how they interact with the service layer. We might also decide to simulate the service layer and not call an actual service layer, so that the test is limited to the controller level. And I think that would be more interesting. So for now, we have a persistence layer. So we have the movie entity here. We have the movie repository, and all of this is unit tested or integration tested, whichever I like to use. The way Spring does the test makes it seem like, at least makes it feel like an integration test, because you're actually persisting data in H2 and retrieving that data. So it's more real. If this query succeeds here, it will likely succeed in the persistence environment. So we have the movie entity, we have the movie repository, and now we have the movie service. So the only thing we are missing now is the movie controller, and that is what we'll be writing in the next stream. So I encourage you to subscribe. Of course, leave a like, and when you subscribe, you'll be notified when I do the next stream, which should be tomorrow. Although tomorrow I have a different session as well around this time, so this might go all the way to Friday. So but if you're subscribed, you'll know when I announce the date and time for that particular stream. So this is the end of the stream. Have a good one. Remember to subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for joining the stream. Thank you for being